Welcome to the Filmmakers Forum. The Filmmakers Forum is an activity of the Nollywood Studies Center, and the Nollywood Studies Center is a unit of the School of Media and Communication of the Pan Atlantic University. It is a center. It is a center. Thank you, Elizabeth. It is a center that is set up to be a resource center for the industry. And the whole idea is, well, to be a center where people can find resources, things about data, and so on and so forth. The Filmmakers Forum is intended to facilitate interaction between the filmmakers and the audience and amongst the filmmakers themselves. And we have been running this for quite a few years. So let me thank you for joining us today. It's raining where I am. It's a rather dull Saturday, but thank you very much. We have as our guest today Mr. James Omokwe. I believe he's with us right now. Exactly. I can see him. Hi, James. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi. Yeah, it was
Hi.
it was crazy getting.
I can imagine. Thank you for joining us. I don't think James requires much of an introduction. Everybody is pretty much aware of his work, but nevertheless, let's say a few things about him just to set the ball rolling. James Omokwe is a renowned Nigerian film director and producer, and the founder of Feemo Vision, a prominent production company in the industry. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Creative Arts from the University of Lagos. He began his career in the film industry as an actor, taking on roles in the television serial Shallow Waters, the 2006 film Serpent in Paradise, and the Mnet soap opera Tinsel. After a stint with the New York Film Academy in 2010, however, he transitioned from acting to producing and directing, driven by his desire to tell authentic African stories. His first feature-length film, Awakening, came in 2013 and earned him an AMA nomination. The film won Best Film category at the AMVCA in the same year. In 2014, James was given an opportunity by Ike Osakiodua to produce a television show, Highlights with Ike, for Africa Magic. This endeavor paved the way for his first TV series, Head Over Heels, which was followed by notable projects such as Ajoche, Rihanna, and Itura, which ran on Africa Magic, and Iche, which runs on Showmax. Ajoche and Rihanna have run now for over 200 episodes each. Through his dedication, talent, and unwavering zeal, James Omokwe has significantly contributed to the African film industry, captivating audiences with his compelling storytelling and commitment to authentic African narratives. James is also dedicated to empowering young filmmakers and promoting the Nigerian film industry on the international stage. So we have with us here James. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, James, and I welcome you again to the Filmmakers Forum.
I'm very happy to be here. Very, very happy to
Great.
be here.
Well, let's set the ball rolling. Well, by the way, for members of our audience, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions, rather to post your questions. So please, if you have questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll take them from there as we go along. Let's set the ball rolling. What, if I may ask now the first question, James, what was the initial attraction for you in going into filmmaking?
Um, so the thing is, when I was growing up, at the beginning, I was very confused about what I wanted to do. At some point, I wanted to be a mechanical engineer because I love to tinker with things. Um, I wish there was a camera like if you in front of me now. There's a toolbox, so I like to tear things apart and put them back together. So I thought that maybe if I was a mechanical engineer, that would feed my drive, you know. And then at some point, I wanted to be an electrical engineer, but I didn't think I had the head for math and all the other, subjects. I wasn't very good at those things. Um, but I was in love with cartoons, so I was a Disney boy. I used to love watching cartoons, and at some point I wanted to do some animation. But as I got into the university, I started, getting very interested in filmmaking. I studied theater in the University of Lagos. Even though that wasn't what I wanted to study, I actually wanted to do a course in the UK for directing for film. But there's a long story there. And I really did get interested in motion pictures and films because in my early days in school, you mentioned in your, like when you were reading my bio, I ventured into doing a television series called Shallow Waters, and that kind of piqued my interest. Story, it's still on Facebook, by the way. My first short film I ever did. So I'd written this, story, put it together, and I got this girl. Her dad brought some equipment and whatever, and we shot that first film. And the the there was a lot of excitement, what I was doing, and I was like, I can do this as a profession. I can actually make stuff. Like, yeah, maybe not cartoons because it wasn't feasible at that time, but I could actually make films. And that was how the hunger started for me, because as soon as I finished school, I did a course at the NYFA. They came to Nigeria with the support from Linus Idahosa, and I did a directing for film course, and that was how my career took off in 2011 up till now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, you've told us the initial attraction, okay? But it has been said a lot about you that you are focused on telling the authentic African stories. And it's also something that you yourself say a lot as well. Can you talk to us about that? Is that one of the driving forces for you in telling, or rather, in directing or producing the kind of films that you do?
So the the mindset to tell authentically African stories didn't come when I first started having this love for film. I think when I first started, I just wanted to tell stories. And but as I when I made my first film 2011, I had done some other stuff, and then I had shut down my company. My first company was called Studio 84, and I had shut that down. I had done a film called
Okay.
Awakening. And Awakening was more, I was in love with telling suspenseful, like thriller type stories, who done it, I want you to think, and all that stuff. And then um I did some TV shows and we just shut everything down. And when I was to revive my company again, failure from my first movie, and then all these other content. And I had watched a lot of people's films and I had seen some of the stuff. And I'm like, look, we have to carve a niche for ourselves. And it's not just about telling stories. What kind of stories do we want to tell that resonates with the African spirit? And I think that I had a lot of experiences with people talking to me about things like the Civil War, things about things that happen in my own hometown, and again, I say this as a side note that one of the biggest things as a writer or a filmmaker or whatever is that you have to experience life. And I did experience a lot of things that informed me to say, listen, the only way we can carve a niche for ourselves is if we dedicate our lives into telling niche African stories. Like, I don't want to tell an action story like another American director. I don't want to do copy and paste, right? Like, I don't want to do that. I want to tell a story from an African perspective. And one of the things that also inspired me was a conversation that I had with somebody who used to draw comics. And we had an argument, and I said to him, I said, you're trying to do Nigerian comics, but you have people wearing tights and pants, just like the Marvel characters. I can't resonate with those guys, right? So if you do it here, you can't do it better than those guys that have done it in the
Right.
last 100 years. You have to bring something fresh. So, and I said to him, I said, have you thought about doing an African superhero? There's a way we can do an African. He doesn't need to wear tights. He doesn't need to wear, he doesn't need to have a cape. Put it in this situation that we can relate to is the everyday Nigerian walking on the street. And, that conversation inspired me. And I said, you know what? I want to tell stories that will get people excited, that once you see it on TV, you feel like you're being represented on the big screen. So When I made my second, when we formed our second company, the first thing we did was a show we had developed, but we didn't shoot it. Like we shot like 5 minutes of it, but I put it on my Instagram. It was called Ojuri, and Ojuri was a fictional folktale story about a warring Yoruba kingdom, and the prince of that kingdom was sent to go and make peace, but somebody in the king's army didn't want that to happen, so they summoned a demon called the Ajindan. I don't speak it correctly, but the Ajindan was face thief basically. And when we shot 3 days and put it out there, and a lot of people who saw it, they were blown away. And this was how we got our first gig at Joche at Mnet, by the way. And that was part of the things that formed the whole thing of, let's not do these regular telenovelas. Let's try and do something that's homegrown and is African. And I don't take all the credit for that, but I give credit to Wangi, who actually saw the vision and said, you know what, let's deviate and tell these stories. And at Joche was till today, and this is what, almost 5 or so years after, they are still playing that show on African Magic, and people still watch it and people still talk about it. So in the sense of marketing and where we are right now in Nigeria, this is what we resonate with. And for me, I thought that this was going to be the best way to go for us to tell our homegrown stories. And that is what has influenced my storytelling. And it doesn't matter if it's a modern story. It really doesn't matter. Like our last show, the second to last show we did, which was DJ, it's a modern story. But what we did was we infused our nuances, our African nuances, our Igbo culture in that story. The entire story is rooted in our African culture. And so even though the premise is almost Western, but the entire story is built on our African culture. And this is why I do what I do.
Great, thank you very much. Now, that I think is something that is rather difficult because we talk about the African story, but it's something that people have said, can you really talk about an African story? Because Africa is so diverse, so many different people, so many different cultures. So, how do you go about ensuring that authenticity? When you say it's an African story, what exactly do you look for?
So the African story is really, the term African story is really about perspective. And I'll give you a perfect example. In or I mean, let me use, most of us grew up in the 80s and the 90s. One of the things that the US did was it's media propaganda. It's what they call it. They infused I use the word advertised how America, how they wanted America to be perceived. And so you would watch, you like Black Americans be like, yo, man, how you doing? What's up? They gave you hip hop. They gave you all these things.
Right.
And it was from all these things that you understood their culture. In fact, I've never been to America before in my entire life, but I know about the struggle, which is, it's that perspective. I know about how the slaves built, the slaves, built America, and all that whole slavery thing until it was abolished. I know about the cowboys. I know about Texas. I know about New York. I know about the New York accent. I know about the gangsters. I know about all those things because that is their world from their perspective. And
Right.
so if you say, I want to tell a Western American story, you're telling a story with the nuances through the American perspective. So you get to know about America and their struggles and their culture from their films. Now, when I say I want to tell an African story, we have our culture, our nuances, our struggles, and our behavior in the way we tell stories. And that's giving things from our perspective. For instance, I was having a conversation with a couple of people, um, top executives from a streaming service. And then we were making a joke, and I was telling them about how at burials in Nigeria that we actually employ people to cry. And then at the end of the day, it's a party. And the woman was looking at me like, what? And I was like, yeah, like it's an African thing. Do you get? And she couldn't wrap her head around it because in America or in the Western world, it's a sad thing for somebody to die. Everybody's wearing black, they're standing at the gravesite, and they're having that conversation, and then everybody goes. But in Nigeria, it's a celebration of life. We'll cry, but we're going to dance. And we're going to eat jollof rice, and we're going to move on. Now, if I decided I could write a story about that experience, in that experience, I'm infusing our culture. I mean, yes, there's the sad story of, oh, yes, this person's father died and whatnot, whatnot. But I've beautified that entire story with our culture, with our nuances, what goes on at a burial, whatever. Families are fighting, who's going to wear the ashwebi, who's going to sign the cloth, who's going to cook the rice. All that stuff is alien to an outsider. It is alien to the Japanese. It is alien to somebody else. And that is our African story. Like, I can tell a story about the South African apartheid. I can tell a story about the Nigerian Civil War and the things that Igbo people went through, or the story about what they call it, this thing that happened, the Lekki massacre, and why we felt the way we felt. I can talk about police brutality from our perspective. That is telling an African story. So in summary, it is garnishing a story with the African culture nuances from our perspective and pushing it to the outside world. That's what I mean by telling an African story.
I like very much what you say because you've given some concrete examples. I mean, you can tell the story about concrete events that took place here. But part of the challenge that we see looking at much of the content that comes out is that, should I say, is that people tend to go perhaps the, I mean, with no disrespect, perhaps the easier way. Because telling a story which is purely fictional, does not require or demand from one certain things that if you wanted to tell a historically accurate story will demand. Because, for instance, that will require a lot of research. It will require really a lot of attention to details to ensure historical authenticity, etc., etc. Now, this is a real challenge that I think perhaps our people face, and it's not always necessarily because of a lack of desire to go down that route. There's so many other challenges. What has it been like for you in terms of dealing with this? Because you want to tell stories which are accurate. You want to tell stories which truly reflect the reality and not something fictionalized purely. So, how do you deal with all of that? How do you meet the challenges? What are the challenges that you have faced in being able to do this, which you would say are common to the industry as a whole?
In all honesty, again, it depends on the kinds of stories you want to tell. I mean, there are so many challenges that affect us as filmmakers, in the kinds of stories we want to tell and how we want to tell those stories. It ranges from support to financing to even just people not allowing you to tell those stories. So,
Right.
for instance, there are certain topics that I cannot broach because of people's emotions towards those stories. There are certain things um, I'm not able to push out because people may feel offended by those stories, depending on where we are. And I'll give you a perfect example, as open-minded as I can be. Um, I mean, I have my mindset about the queer community and all that. Again, it's my prerogative. But there are a couple of people who are trying to tell stories about their experiences in Nigeria in the queer community. Those kinds of stories are not allowed to be told because of our belief in um, you know who's being queer and who's not being queer. There are people who are trying to tell stories about the Biafran War and their experiences in either from an emotional point of view, it depends on whose side you're on, or even just from a bystander's point of view. Yeah, nobody's going to allow you to tell those kinds of stories. Then there's the financing part. There's the financing part because as an industry,
Mhm.
there are issues in terms of us not having an ecosystem that is worthy of allowing other people to invest. Meaning that if I say I want to make a movie and I want to tell this grand story for 100 million, how am I going to get my money back? So there are a lot of difficulties. How I survive in telling those how I survive in this conundrum is I always ask myself, what is the story that I want to tell, and how's the best way that I want to tell it without facing all these problems? So, for instance, I'm not going to say that I want to tell a war and I don't have 100 million to even feed my cast and crew. So, what is the one story that I can tell that will resonate in the smallest scale as possible and to make that happen? And this is what has guided me throughout my entire journey as a filmmaker, because you have to read the room, look at the area and say, how can I tell this story? What is the best way to tell this story? Okay, I don't have the funds to tell this particular story. How can I do X, Y, Z? I mean, that just sums up, the generalization of how I can, pass through the needle and say, okay, you know what, maybe this is not the time to tell the story, okay, so I can tell it this way. Or maybe this is not the time to tell this particular story, okay, maybe I can do it in this particular way.
Great. Thank you. Now, your quote, by the way, just a reminder to our audience that you're free, please, to drop your questions in the chat room, and we'll take them from there as we go along. Now, James, you're quoted as saying a lot of people learned a lot watching Rihanna. It's more like you are teaching history with entertainment. Okay, those were
Usually
your
it's
words. Now, is this what you set out to do with your productions? Do you set out to teach? I mean, judging from looking at that quotation of yours, do you set out to teach with your productions, or what is it that you hope for or you aim for when you produce a series?
so I feel like we're griots, and you know how we say, African griots, um, and we, in generation to generation, we pass, our stories from one generation to the other. And this is how, history is passed down. This is how you learn about your history. Africans weren't very good at writing things down. So they would tell their children, oh, this is what your grandfather did 20,000 years ago. And this is how we took over this community, X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. Now, I see myself as a sort of griot, because one of the reasons why we're telling these African stories is, why don't we and teach you in an entertainment, in the guise of entertainment? I mean, my role is not to teach you, but it's to show you certain things that you probably didn't even know. I mean, in history, I did history as an elective in the university. They don't teach you about, your Nigerian history. They teach you about Mansa Musa and the trade routes between one place to one place. Like, nobody's telling you about the Shekiri kingdom. Like, doing all the shows that I've done, I've been blown away by the amount of knowledge that I've gained in the history that I've, been taught just by doing research on these shows. I was amazed by just knowing how the Ishekiri kingdom was formed, right? It was a story, a man called Ginwa, who was a Benin royal. He was of Benin royalty. He was exiled. And there's a story around how he slapped his stepmother, long and short of the story. But he was exiled with a group of people, and they entered into a boat, and they came to a land where they met a couple of people who, you know, this is what one of the stories, say. And, they met this guy called the Shakiri, and, they all one thing, and they decided that they were going to form an entire community and whatnot, right? And this is part of the stories, true, false, but it's one of the stories. But it's amazing to see how, because when you look at the Shekiri kingdom, if you see their insignia, there's a lot of similarities with the Benin people. And then there's this whole thing of how, it's the king married Benin wife. And so, but sometimes you're here, wondering, oh, why is that? But you don't even understand, how that happened. And if you also notice in their regalia, you see a lot of Western influences in the crown and whatnot, and you realize that that was influenced by the Portuguese. Like, I'm sitting down and I'm like, oh, I didn't even know this, existed, and you hear stuff about even where I'm from. I'm from Arochukwu, And I had no idea that there was something called the Aro Ibibio War, which was a war between Arochukwu and the Ibibio people because of land, right? And there's a shrine in my village called the Ibini Ukpabi, which belonged to the Ibibio people. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, how did I know? I didn't even know this, right? And so it's interesting, even with the Yoruba culture, I had no idea about the Ekiti Parakwa War, rather. And you're sitting down and you're like, you're Yoruba, you're Igbo, all you're concerned about is the politics of today and what is happening, but you don't even know the history of the people and how you even migrated to where you are today. And it's fun to learn these things and infuse it in the stories that we tell. So yes, the stories are for entertainment, it's great, but you want to learn one or two things. And I want people to walk away saying, oh, I knew there was something new. So for instance, when we did Ajocha and then what you might call it, what's his name? The Ogiame was being crowned. People who had watched the show were watching that entire thing, and they were when every time they went, oh yeah, man, people were saying it in their homes. I've seen tweets where people were like, if I didn't watch the show, I wouldn't have known what was going on, right? And so that makes me happy because when you watch the show, you learn something about somebody else's culture. People keep asking me, I'm an Igbo boy. They keep asking me, why are you not doing Igbo shows? Because I'm a Nigerian. I'm interested in the Shagiri culture, just like I'm interested in the Benin culture. I'm also interested in the Yoruba culture, because I also want you to walk away learning something about your culture. Even if you're Igbo, you are still Shekiri, you are Yoruba, you all live in the same town. You are all here in this Nigeria. And so you have to understand where your brother comes from, where your sister comes from, your neighbor, this is where he comes from. And that's what we hope to do. I always want to educate, always, no matter how fictitious the story is. There's an element of reality or realism in the story that can make you think and say, oh, that's true. Oh, this is actually a true thing, even though it's fake. But yeah, but this particular practice is true. So yes, I want to educate people. I want people to know about their culture, and I also want to entertain them at the same time.
Actually, you're saying that reminds me. I did an audience survey at some point, and some of the people I spoke to made this point very clearly, that one of the reasons they enjoyed the Nigerian productions was that they could identify. Okay, they say, yes, I recognize myself. I recognize things of my environment in this film, so I can relate better. So it's a very solid point, really. However, now, how do you set about the historical reconstruction? And how do you ensure accuracy and authenticity? I know, yes, there's the element of research, but sometimes finding the data could be challenging. So how do you cope with all of that?
So in all honesty, remember when I said that sometimes when you're telling these stories, there's a lot that I mean, most of the research is word of mouth. Like, it was very difficult for people to write some of these things down. And the thing about spoken research is, or rather spoken history, is that it changes over time. And the truth is that there's no real visual representation of what these people look like at so and so point in time. So, for instance, if you're telling a story about Nigeria or maybe a particular tribe in the 14th century, there isn't any visual representation of what they looked like in the 14th century. So you have to say to yourself, okay, what's the oral interpretation of how these people looked? But because it's fiction, what creative um, addition can we add to it that's not taken away from the culture? So, for instance, if we maybe in a particular culture, they had three scarves on the right. I was three, maybe they had a shawl or something, but it was three on the right, and maybe they couldn't explain that in English, or even if they did, maybe it doesn't work for us visually, and we could say, okay, you know what? Can we just have one shawl? But the question is, those three shots, is there a meaning to it? If there's no meaning to it, then we can adjust and say, okay, we can have this. In fact, we can even take it off and say, you know what, leave it bare chested and let's just move on, right? Because again, it's for the story, because it's fictional. And the other thing I always tell people, especially when we do our shows, in fact, one of the shows that we did, I had a couple of people call me and say, no, that's not how we do it in our own place. No, that's how, and I'm like, yeah, it's fiction. Like, I'm not doing a documentary. I'm telling a story. And what this creative decision that we made, fits the story. However, there are some things that we can't change. So another example with Rihanna. So the Ogiame can never see anybody who dies. It's not he can't see he can't see anybody who's dead. And it's a lot. And in fact, most African kings can't see dead people, right? So there are two parts in the story. There was one where his wife that he loved so much was dying in his arms. So he went and swore for something. It's part of the story. And when he did what he did or whatever, the woman died in his arms. For the story, because he loved her so much, we needed to almost allow it for fictional purposes for that scene to happen. If it didn't happen, he wouldn't have turned into the king that he turned into for the rest of the show, right? However, when they were burying her, we decided to now go with the real thing, which is he cannot be there when they are burying her. So he was in a hut while the procession was going on and he was mourning her, right? Now, again, that's a creative decision based on story. It's not a real life, like in real life, the king womb, obviously that wouldn't happen, but because it's fictional, we have to do like, okay, let's try to do this creatively because we're trying to tell a story and is what it is. So sometimes we make those exceptions as long as we are not desecrating the culture, right, of the tribe it is that we're depicting. Usually we have a cultural consultant on set, and then we always have those conversations. So when the cultural consultant is like, no, this one you cannot do, and we're like, okay, we're going to write the script. You get, okay, we can't do this one. Yeah, people are going to drag us. But if we're like, okay, we can get away with it, people will be upset, but I can understand where you're going. Okay, no problem. And that's how we do it.
Okay, well, we have here an adherent. Akindele says, I watched the whole Rihanna for 7 days. I was so glued to the show as if it's part of me. Omokwe Mudokwe. Well, whatever.
I
Okay.
appreciate that.
And Phoebe says with a smiley face, I am Shakiri. That's, I would say, with a bit of pride as well.
Yeah.
Elizabeth says, I love Ajoche. Well done, sir. I hope to meet you someday. But let me
Thank you
take the
very much.
question of Toby. Toby says, thank you. I wanted to ask because I really relate to the parts about being interested in genres like thriller, mystery, fantasy, dystopian, etc. Although I did not study anything theater related, I actually studied law. I wanted to ask for advice for people with non-theater or creative backgrounds that want to enter filmmaking and or script writing, especially with being assistants or interns. So Toby is trying to find out how to break into the industry with a non-theater background or non-filmmaking background.
Um, Theater, doesn't really doesn't, because in all honesty, didn't study filmmaking. Some of the greatest uh, actors or whatever didn't have to go to school to do anything. Filmmaking is an expression. There's a language and there are rules. And what you want to do is to go and study those rules on how to apply them while you're expressing yourself, basically. Um, and because you didn't go to university to study doesn't mean that you cannot do another course after school. And when I say course, it could be a 3-month course, 2 months, 6 months in learning a new skill, right? There are a lot of film schools out there. In fact, in Lagos here, you have Ebony Life, you have Del York,
Mhm.
and there's Pefty. There's so many of them. There's some in Jos, like there's so many. Um, and then there's masterclass online. Masterclass is about $180, and then you can pick, and if it depends on what you want, you can pick some people's classes and learn. Then there's free stuff online. What really drives filmmaking is the passion. It's really not the skill in quotes, right? Because even if you don't have the skill now, you can employ people who have the skill to say, this is the story that I want and this is where I'm going. And I would like for us to do X, Y, Z. Do you get? I have somebody who spoke to me last Sunday who's very much interested in making film. He's a pharmacist. He has no, he's not even in the industry, but he wants to make something. And he's like, oh, look, can I hire you to do X, Y, Z? Right. So I think that you should do your best to start to pick up material, start to learn and pick up, like, go online, you know. I mean, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a director, go and get material on how to be a director. If you want to be a script writer, you get the material on how to do that. It's not rocket science. And the thing about it is, the more you do it, the better at it that you become.
That's a good point. But Toby has added something here. He says, additionally, are you by chance looking for production interns? I have done a few courses with the TAFTA Creative Academy. So he's asking for an opening here. Okay.
Well, currently, I'm trying to look for the email. I wanted to post it here. There's an email that you can apply. Before the end of this conversation, I will find it and I'll just put it in the. I know it's
Okay.
f.jobs, I think, at femovision.com. Yeah,
Okay.
and you can put the subject as I'm applying to be an intern or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So Toby, ask and you shall receive. That's your answer for you. Okay. Now I have here a question from Tony Ada, who says, thanks for sharing your thoughts about authentic African stories. Does authenticity blunt international portability of a film? How have you made local authentic stories enjoyable to those who might not be African?
So storytelling in itself has there's a method to the madness, you know, and I think that if you think of storytelling as a spine, why do people like stories? It's because of how they were written, because of the inciting incidents, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. That's why anybody likes any story, which is why am I watching the story? Who's the hero? Who's the antagonist? Why is the hero doing what he's doing? What is the motive behind XYZ? Blah blah blah. So regardless of what you coat the spine with, if a story follows these rules and it's interesting enough, people will watch the story. However, when you now quote it, the question is, what are you quoting it with, right? So if you're telling a Nigerian superhero story or the Nigerian version of Superman, you've told a good story, but because you've put it in the context of Superman, first of all, you don't have the budget to do Superman. Secondly, like, we've all seen it before, I'll just get tuned off. Like, I'm just like, no, I don't want to watch this. But I want to watch something where you've told the right story in the right structure, but I'm also seeing visuals that I've never seen before. E.g., if you guys are, I have not watched this, but if you're following the show on Mnet, the Shaka show that everybody is raving about, like, it's authentically African, because if a foreigner watches it, they've never seen the South African culture in that manner. I mean, we saw Shaka years ago, but this is just a new take of it. But it's different from Fast and Furious, Flash, and the other things that we watch on TV. It's just a new world and it's a new perspective. And that's, it's mind-boggling, right? And so to the foreigner, because it's something he hasn't seen before, he's a lot more interested. Why do you think streaming services are running to Africa? Because what do you think they're looking for? They're looking to invest in authentic stories that they can give to the diasporan audience. Because we've seen how many Fast and Furious movies do we want to see? How many Superman? Like, it's boring. We're tired of it. Hollywood has no new stories to tell. There's nothing else. You've said it all, do you get? Which is why, if you look at the niche markets, the Korean guys, the
Yeah.
Indian guys, the Africans, those are the stories that people go on Netflix and go and see how much Korean content, how much Netflix is investing in Korean content. You know how many Nigerians watch Korean TV shows? A lot of Nigerians are even speaking Korean because they're in love
Mhm.
with the culture, and those guys don't play. So any film you see, even if it's action, Even if it's a superhero film, they will always infuse their authenticity and their culture. And by authenticity, what do I mean? You do a film, local language. You do a film, local nuances. Like one of my best films, and I'm not saying this because she's my friend or anything, is Gangs of Lagos. It's one of the best Nigerian films out there, period. Because when you watch it, you know that this is Nigeria. Like you don't need a soothsayer to tell you that this is Nigeria. They're speaking Yoruba from beginning to end. It's Isaleko, that's inside that Lagos Island. That's the life, meat sellers, all those small nuances. And when you are watching it, you are pointing. I know this guy. I can relate to this. Oh shit, I know where this place is. You know those kinds of things. And that's what being authentic is all about. You have to be true to your own self. If you're doing a film, speak your local language, speak the pidgin. Stop saying, "Hey man, how you doing? Oh my god, I want to take you to dinner." No, like we are tired of it. Like we're tired of it. We've seen it in all the American movies. We're done. Give us the authenticity of Nigeria or wherever it is that you're from, and give it to the audience. They will love it. You think Americans don't like how you speak? Everybody is running after Afro beats. I watch TikToks every day of Korean people trying to sing Afro beats. They're trying to speak pidgin English. They're doing all your TikTok dances because is that's the thing now, right? They want to speak like you with the way you do do your intonations, but you want to speak like them. You're the one every day doing, "Hey man, what's happening?" They don't want to hear. They like your authenticity, and you have to keep that. So to answer your question, it is the authentic. There's no being authentic doesn't stop you from selling out or making a lot of. In fact, you will make a lot more money when you're being authentic.
Great. Still, well, let me pull a little on that line. It's rather that you went beyond the usual practice of focusing on the three major tribes in the country, Tubes, Ajoche, and Riona, in the Idoma and Ishikiri cultures, respectively. What was your motivation for this?
So when you think about Nigeria, in fact, when you go to school, they tell you what are the three major tribes: Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, right? And a lot of people have no idea that there are like over 100 of like 200 plus tribes or languages, the cultures in this one country that we live in. And like I said, even when we made those shows, there are, in fact, Ajoche was inspired by my co-founder's mother-in-law. The language we used, because she's Idoma, and every time I used to go to their house, she's speaking to Tin, and I'm like, please, what's happening? Where are you from? But then I got to find out that she was from the same place as Two Face, right? So, I mean, I heard a lot of some of his songs, and then I'm like, what language are they speaking, right? And a lot of people never knew that there's anything called Idoma. Do you get? And then, when we're sitting down in the story workshop and thinking about what to do, and we're like, oh, shit, we're going to do a cultural show, so what show? And I'm like, let's not do Igbo, let's not do House. Like, that is a given. Like, when you want to do this kind of thing, is this what you tell you to do? I said, because we already have Epic, you had your Africa Magic Epic, which had a lot of epic Igbo stuff. And then there's the Yoruba community that has their stuff. And then, the Hausa guys are doing their stuff. I said, let's put a spotlight on a culture that they've never. How many Ishekiri films, TV shows do you have in the history of Nigeria? I can tell you maybe like one or two or three. And so for me, I'm like, you know what? Let's spotlight this culture on a big African magic. It will make a lot of sense. And then in truth, a lot of people got to know about these cultures because of these TV shows. Nobody, even the Shakiri people, like in all honesty, I didn't really know. I mean, I had heard about the Shakiri people, but I didn't know anything about them until we started doing research and until this story came about. And I dare say, and I mean, I dare say, and I know somebody will come for me, but if we didn't do Iriona, I don't think the spotlight of the coronation of the king of Ishekiri would be half as much. I mean, people would have known about it, but because they could relate to that show, the show was airing at the time when this thing was happening. And so when people are shouting, "Oh yeah, man," there are people that are saying "Oh yeah, man" in their house, not because they knew about, from newspapers or whatever. It's because they watched Rihanna or Rihanna, which is how it's pronounced. And so, it did, that show put that spotlight on that culture. And it's something that I would really love to do for all the other cultures. Unfortunately, the last show I did was Yoruba, and somebody asked me about a scoop. So the current show that I'm doing is an Igbo show. Because
Okay.
before, my Igbo brothers will put me in jail. They will say, "I can't do that. We don't do our own show." And so, but at some point, one of the things we want to do in future is tell stories about other tribes. The Bibios are there, the Kanuris are there. Like, there's so many of them. Even in the Yoruba land, there are so many different factions, cultures, languages in that one Yoruba land. Even in the Igbo culture, the Arochukwu people don't, the language we speak is not general Igbo. I used to tell people, like, the Igbo you are hearing, like you hear everybody's, that's not how we speak in my language. That's not how Igbo people speak, right? Everybody is speaking general Igbo, which is like Anambra, but there's so many other cultures and tribes, and how those people came to be. They're all beautiful stories, and I would love to tell those stories at some point in time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, Akinyele would like to take you down a different path to a different culture. He says, I'm a gospel drama minister. The first episode of Itura took me to social media to search about James Omokwe. I so much love the show, and I started watching your shows like Ajoche, Riona, and Ojuri. Sir, I would like if you can tell a story about Oyo Kingdom, the civil war among Ibadan, Modakeke, and Ife, and how another kingdom called Odeomu came into existence 700 years ago.
I mean, if we find people who give us money to do it, why not? When we're doing the research for Itura, we did learn about the Oyo Empire, and how, even how, after the fall of the Oyo Empire, what led to the Ekiti War, right? And it was interesting to note, and even when you read and you realize that the foreigners also had some influence in some of those wars, and how even during the Ekiti War, Yoruba kings were writing letters and whatnot. It's amazing to read and to reimagine, and I'll be happy to do that. In fact, like I said, there's too many stories. If we decided that we're going to keep telling stories and people are going to keep funding us, I'll probably be telling stories until I'm 92. It's too many to tell.
Right. Now, although your first production was a feature-length film, all your subsequent work has been on television series. Is this by design, and or that is this a preference for this platform, or is it just a phase of the body of work you intend to develop?
Okay, so I'm gonna be honest. The reason why I prefer TV is because it's a great business decision. So with TV and being commissioned, the headache of whether the film is going to be distributed or whether the film is going to make money, or the TV show basically, is not on me. It's on the channel. It's really not my business. They pay me to do the work that I do. I get a percentage of the budget. I deliver the work, and I go to my house and enjoy myself. I have no issues running around asking people to please watch my show. Nope, nope, nope. That's their problem. And why that happened was because of my experience with my first film. And I don't blame it. So the experience, again, was very premature. I mean, it happened, but you do realize that when you're making a film, there's a lot of selling that has to do, like, you've made the film, then you have to convince people to go to the cinemas and watch your film. And even when they do go to the cinemas and watch your film, you realize that the ecosystem in which your business is surviving isn't even viable, because at the end of the day, how many people are going to watch the film? You have to think about how many people have money to spend, and if they do, you drag people to the cinemas. At the end of the day, you take 30% of the earnings because you have to pay tax, you have to pay your distributor. So you end up taking money and making a fantastic film, and then you come home thing, right? And then you have people sharing your film on Telegram saying, "Oh, this new film has come and watch it." Do you understand? And then you haven't made any money. So it's a better business decision to move to TV and get commission to do stuff, or move to streaming services and get commission to do stuff. I think until the ecosystem is viable, and our biggest problem is distribution. Until that is fixed, until more people, until we're able to bring our products down to the point where people can actually spend money to watch them, thereby giving us more avenues to make money, maybe, I mean, I can consider making films for the cinema. But if I still want to do films now, it would be streaming services and TV. It just makes business sense to do that.
Okay. So if you had to give advice to a young person right now, you you would go for this. That would be the solid advice to young people who are trying to break into this industry, to focus on this platform of television.
So the other thing that television does, or streaming services and whatnot, is that they provide structure. So you learn a lot about working for multinationals and working for structured TV. I feel like every other person who makes a film, and this is no disrespect to any other filmmaker, is that you're doing it independently. So you work with your own rules. You may not understand,
Yeah.
um, you know, uh, what they call them. You may not understand standards, like broadcast standards. What people you get, like,
Yeah.
you know, formats and what channels want, and delivery styles and delivery patterns, and all that stuff. You're just making a film for your own expression, and yeah, you put it in the cinemas, you don't care. But a lot of times when these people transition to making shows for TV, it becomes extremely difficult. Like, some of them don't even get to finish making the shows, or there's just some issues. And so for me, every filmmaker needs to start from a place. So go work on TV, go work on a place, somebody who's doing a TV show for Netflix, Amazon Prime, Mnet, Iroko TV, go and work there. You start there, build a career for yourself, right? And then you could become a TV producer or a TV director. You hone that skill. Then you can branch out when you've made connections in the industry and you've known a lot of people. You can now branch out and say, yeah, I can. The other thing I would say is, for first-time filmmakers, it's very difficult to make a film on your own, because films are sold because of who you are. And so people watch my
Mm.
TV shows because of the TV show and because it's James Omokwe. And so if you've not made a name for yourself, it's very difficult to sell a film. In fact, it's very difficult for anybody to give you any money, because they'll be like, so what have you done before? So who are you? What clout can you carry on your back? So you can't say, oh, I just finished film school and I shot a film with Denzel Washington, so I'm the best thing since sliced bread. So therefore, if I make a film, everybody's going to watch it. Nope, it's not going to happen, right? It's not. It's never going to happen. So if you have to get. So I've been doing this since, this is my 12th year. I started out as a film director with this mindset that I just came out of film school and I'm going to do a film, and that film is going to be the best thing since sliced bread. That film flopped woefully, because it was my friends and family that went and watched the film. I made 1.4 million naira on that film, and I spent 3 million naira making the film. I made I spent 5 million and we made 1.4. I still have the slip. It's in my email, right? I was owing people for almost 3 years. I couldn't post pictures on Facebook because I say I want to be I'm a superstar. However, in 2014, I a friend of mine gave me an opportunity to be a consulting producer on a television show. It was a late night TV show called Highlights with IK. And I was working as a producer, not a director, because remember, I was coming off a film that had been in the cinema. And so I was a producer for a couple of years. I did that producing thing. I became the co-producer of the show. We were doing the show. I carry my bag, I'm working, I'm answering to somebody, learning how to deliver, doing all that stuff, until I got to the point where somebody said, I think you're ripe enough to do your own show. Even when they said I was ripe enough to do my own show, I still failed, because I did the show. It was terrible. Until I had the second chance to now do a Joche, which I had learned a lot, and then decided to do what I'm doing. So now I'm an executive producer, and this is 12 years in the business. 5 years being an 5 years being 7 years being a producer, but 12 years in the industry from being a director. So under my belt, I've had 40,000 minutes of TV. And so I can take 40,000 minutes on TV and go anywhere and say, this is my pedigree. I want to make a film. And somebody, oh yeah, I've seen your stuff. Here's some money. Go and make a film. Right? And so to close this, you should never forget the years of servitude. Go and learn. It's not going to school is not it. Learning on the job is it. Building a portfolio and building, your numbers and building that experience, failing and doing it and failing and doing it and failing is how to become the man that you want to become in the industry.
But just one quick question here. Now, how does a young person break into the television industry to, as it were, begin to earn those minutes?
Yeah, I think that so the same way somebody just asked me now if there was an internship program, it's the same way you break into it. Look around and find out who's working and how I can help. So I have a friend who sent me a message and says, "Oh, James, so now that you're in the industry, give me some directing gigs. Yeah, I just want to be, you two are there now, so just be throwing me." So man, I'm like, I'll just be throwing you directing gigs just like that, like because they sell it in the market. And you get. And so I said to him, I said, get your CV, send it to a production company, and find out what's available to do. Is it a PA? Go and start being a PA if you want to. Like if that's your entry point. If you look at yourself and say, I'm too big to be a PA, okay, no problem. Like go be a PA or go be a production coordinator. And then that if that's your entry point, but you want to be a director, go and be standing next to the director and be asking him, sir, what is the thing that you are doing? Be taking notes and be learning. And you never know. Like, so when we first, I'll tell you a story. When we first started doing our Joche, there were two guys who used to work with us. They were ADs, assistant directors. That was what we hired them for. But occasionally, as the show kept going, sometimes when we had to split into two units, and by splitting into two units, you had a lot of directors running from pillar to post, just trying because we needed to. And one of the guys, the ADs would say, "Boss, he'll be asking questions. Oh, what did they do? How far? Blah blah blah. This, blah, blah." And then one day I was doing, I had to run back to do something, and I had a scene to shoot. He said, "Boss, I think cover the scene for you now." I said, "Okay." So I went and he directed the scene, and I came back and I watched the tape, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, it was great." And so every other time when I need to run and do some other work, I was like, "Hey, cover the scene for me." And that's how he started covering the scene. And then on the last day of shoot, he shot one of the most iconic scenes that ended at Joche from being an AD. Now on the next show, he had proven himself. The next show, he became a second unit director. On the next show after that, he became a full-blown director. And he's gone on to direct other things. You remember he started out as an AD, two of them. There's another guy who's working with me now who was he was the third AD on a TV show 2 years ago. He joined us as an associate producer, and now he's creative producer. And so if you don't start doing something, right, and don't prove yourself, nobody's going to give you an opportunity if you don't prove yourself. There's nobody in this world that come and tell me, oh, you're a director, but you're a director in your mind. You've not done any work. You don't have any body of work. Do you understand? You've not been through the fire, because it's one thing to say you're a director and be creative, to fight the forces of the Murphy's Law to get the desired things that you need. You've not been through that process, but you want to direct, so that when I give you something you fail, then everybody will not die. And so that's the best way to start up. Start as something. Go and watch people doing stuff. Sorry, I because sometimes I talk a lot. When I don't know, a lot of people know the head of Mnet, the head of production, Victor Sanchez. When he was a director at Tinsel, I used to drive and follow him around, and I'll just be watching him. I wasn't working. It was before then, before I became an actor on Tinsel. But before then, I would be driving around. I'll be sitting down, looking at him, Oh, what are you doing? How are you doing it? I'll stay in the room and then I'll go. But you can't get into these spaces if you're not in people's faces and actually doing the
Right.
learning, because that's the only way that you can go forward.
Right. Right. Thank you. Now, Elizabeth would like to know, what do Nigerian casting directors actually look out for?
This question. So the easiest way for me to explain it is that when we write something or we envision a show, we've watched it in our heads. And so when the script says there is a king, fierce king, built this, that, I've imagined it in my head. So when I'm looking out for an actor, I'm looking for somebody that's as close to what I imagined in my head. And so, but first of all, I'm looking at the fact that you can perform, which is the criteria, first things first. And in performing, a lot of times I did an audition recently, and a lot of times, people think that crying, phone calls, phone call auditions, because some people come to auditions and just carry phone. Hello, who is talking? They think that's audition. Or that you can cry is an audition, or that you can be angry. No, we're really looking for how you can. In fact, the basis of it is that whatever it is that you're doing, if you can make me believe in what you are doing, then if you can trick me into believing that it is not you that walked into the room and is doing this performance for me at this point in time, then you have a spot at doing whatever I'm doing. Because the thing about TV is called, I mean, that's why they call it television. A friend tells me it's called tell live vision, which is we're lying to the audience. We're evoking their emotion. We want you to cry. We want you to be upset when this guy says to the girl, I don't love you anymore. I want you to go on Twitter and write a thread about how men are scum because of this particular scene that happened. That's what I want. I need to manipulate you into believing that's what it is. And the entire essence of TV is suspending your belief. And so if you cannot suspend my belief, I'm still down here, then you haven't done the work that you need to. You get my point? So that's the first thing I'm looking for with your performance. And then the second thing I'm looking for is, do you fit the character? Like, do you look like the character? If your character has siblings, do the siblings look like you? Because sometimes I tweeted something recently. Sometimes I can have a very fantastic actor, but you see, maybe that actor has 3 siblings on the show, but you're fair. But the other people we've casted for the role, they're dark skinned, right? It's not necessarily plausible that you're the only dark person when all your do you understand what I mean? So you may be the best person for the part, but you may not, in terms of casting, it may not just work for every other character. Or maybe you look older than your senior brother in the show, and it doesn't work. So there's it's a lot. So sometimes you've read the first time and I'm like, oh, it's great. But then we've seen other people who are really going to be related to you, or people that you'll be performing with. I'm like, it doesn't necessarily work. Okay, let's do another reading. Or maybe you don't even have chemistry with the person that who you're going to be paired with. And like I said, what we're looking for is chemistry. You get? So if there's a love scene, do you guys fit? Like, if people watch you, are they going to have googly eyes and be like, oh my God, I want to be like these people? And those are the things we look out for.
Okay, thank you. Emolua says, well, she's referring now to what you say about the business decision to remain on television. And she says, do you think this is one of the reasons why you can easily cast new talents because there's no pressure to sell?
Sorry, I didn't say that. Do you think?
No, she says, do you think she's referring now to your decision to be on television as a business decision? She says, do you think this is one of the reasons why you can easily cast new talents because there's no
Oh, sure.
pressure to sell?
Yes. There's actually no pressure, because the thing is, with African Magic, they want to do. They always want to help. Like, African Magic has a thing with stars. Like, they want to make stars, and so they
Yeah.
believe that their platform is also great for for new talents that come up. And so it also gives us the opportunity to find new talents. It also gives us the opportunity to say, look, I mean, because how many people want to use in if I have one actor and I've spread him across 3 projects, people will get bored.
Mhm.
You get. And so it's very important as to why we choose new and emerging talents to be in these shows. In fact, that's the core focus, because there's so many young people who can perform. So many, right? And so that's important. I wanted to respond to a question. That's what I read before the other question. That's why I didn't hear you. This is from Alex. Alex says that he hopes that I gave him the credit. The show is on TV now. You and I had that conversation, so I'm not sure why you're typing this conversation here. We made those calls. RMD called me and we made those calls. So the show is on TV. You can check. And you said quickly, we have the Shekiri people and Warri Kingdom, not the Shekiri Kingdom. 2 of the Shekiri people are known worldwide, long before Rihanna, for various reasons. Thirdly, Shekiri film, incidentally, my film in 100% in languages is fully subtitled and acquired by African Magic. And yes, I do agree with you. And I think to add to what I was saying, one of the things that Rihanna did was put that spotlight, right? In truth, even after I met him, he gave me one of his films that he did. They're not, if you look at the ratio to Yoruba films, to Igbo films, and to Shekiri films, like it's all these other cultures bury the efforts that these other people make. It's not mainstream, and I think that one of the things that the show did was put that spotlight on the culture, and I would love for more people to keep making those films at the standard of which it can compete with other language films, right? And so yeah, I do agree with you. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, no, Phoebe, no, thank you. Phoebe wants to know, do you ever experience burnout creatively, and how do you deal with it?
So first things first, I have ADHD. ADHD is an attention deficit disorder. Like once I get um once I'm there's a word I'm looking for, overstimulated, I can't do anything anymore. Like my brain just flat. It's just like flat. It flats. I flat out, right? So yes, I do burn out, but I have a support system. So there are a lot of people that I know, that, so from my producers to everybody around me, that needs to carry me when I need to be carried. So and the good thing about what I do is I delegate a lot. And so when I say this is what I want, this is how I need it to be done, we have our initial meetings and I say this is it, and then I can go and do something else. Currently I'm probably doing like maybe 4 projects at the same time. And so, one of the things I've learned how to do is just delegate accordingly. And so I have, again, do this at so and so time, so that I can sit down and watch TV and relax. And then when I'm up for it again, I come back, oh yeah, let's do this. But for me to burn out, it takes a while. Like it takes a long time for me to burn out. But when I do, yeah, I try to rest as much as I can.
Fantastic. Precious says, hello. When you were talking on perception and perspective, I understood that showing people things from our perspective is giving them an opportunity to taking the world through our senses. That is, not just seeing what we see, but seeing the way we see. One, how do you get people to share in your perspective? Or is it more of an attempt to simulate, an experience for viewers? Two, how do you train your mind to pick up on subtleties in culture and people's stories that set various attempts at storytelling via film apart?
Um, I think that the thing about the human mind is, if you've seen something, if you're seeing something that you've never experienced before, it's like when you soak in new knowledge, you're very well aware that this is new knowledge. Like if you're used to something and then you see people behave a different way, it it's a culture shock for you. And so you don't need to train your senses to receive culture shock. Like it's clear. It hits you. And you're like, oh, this is how these people do it. So this is how it happens in this town. Do you get? And it's left for you to. I mean, it's knowledge that is open. It's gone into your head, so oh, this is how these people do X, Y, Z. Right? There's a reason why Yorubas dobale when they are greeting. It didn't just come from somewhere. Maybe in somebody else's culture, or to the white man, he will see you and be like, "Hey man, what's up?" He doesn't understand why you're going on the floor. Like, what's that? But he's when he sees it in the film, it's new information for him, and he's learned something new about these people. It's like when you're traveling. When you travel, you realize that people. I'll give you an example. So outside the country, people think that Nigerians are very loud. Not in a bad way. They just feel like Nigerians are loud. Like if they don't shout, you are not in Nigeria. Like you've not landed, is my point. And it's for me, with the way I'm talking now is normal. Like when I go outside and I'm talking like this, more like you're shouting. And I'm like, how do you whisper in this country? Like, what's happening? I need to shout because they can't hear me. Do you get? But it's a culture shock for them because they're like, why are you shouting? Like, if you need something, you get like, why are you upset? Why are you angry? Do you understand? But Lagos already makes you angry on a good day. So when you go outside and you're not angry, or rather, when you go outside and you're angry, they're looking at you like, why are you upset? Like, what the hell? So you need a special third eye, or you don't need to do anything funny. You're being authentic. Some people don't understand why Nigerians have tribal marks. Some people think it's skin mutilation, but they mean something. And when you tell them, "Oh, this thing means something," they're like, "Oh, okay." It's culture shock for them, and so you don't need to train your mind. You just need to know, or you just need to be exposed to something that you didn't know before, and you realize that okay, this is what it is. And then to your second question, which is, or part of your second question, which is, how do you train your mind to pick up on subtleties in people's stories that set various attempts in storytelling via film? Like again, I'm not just throwing these subtleties just because I'm things just because I want to throw them. Like, does it help the story? It's the question. Like, for me, if I'm telling a story about the Benin people and there's something that I'm putting inside, even with the way they talk, or worry people with the way they speak their pidgin, like, is it important? Is there a reason why I'm putting that in? Do you get? And when you hear it, does it tell you something? Does it tell you this is the kind of person that they are? Do you get? Does it tell you that this is why they do what they do? Those are the important key elements, when you're telling your story. Like, it's really all about authenticity. There's no hard or fast routes. There's no mysticism behind it. It's that these people behave in this way. You're being authentic when you're showing it to them. And for those who don't know that they behave this way, it's culture shock. It's as simple as that.
Right. Thank you. Now, I have here one last question. Our time is running out. Just one last question from me. The role of film critic is not so well developed in our film industry, and many filmmakers become quite antagonistic in the face of criticism. However, in an interview of yours, you speak very positively about receiving feedback and criticism for your work. What does such criticism and feedback do for you?
So if you look at it in like as business, right? Or look at it this way. When you wake up in the morning to decide to make a film, you've decided to express your thoughts and your creativity in a product. And what you are telling people is that, as I've made this product, I want you to come and spend your money and experience this product. It's not free. So I'm going to take my hard-earned money and go and experience your thought process or your mindset or whatever. And then I feel like if I've created this product, I expect that people would give me feedback about this product, and everybody will come with different perspectives and whatever. And then it also depends if I made the product to standard. If I didn't make the product to standard, people will not like the product because the money that they've paid, they didn't get their money's worth. And I'm very open to those conversations because it helps me get better. So in everything that I've said, I love criticism. And I'll give you a perfect example. My current TV show, there are people that don't necessarily like the show, and that is fine. I'm okay with it, because even me, I criticize the show on my inside my own heart, because I know that, oh, there are certain things we could have done better and whatnot. And so because it resonates with people who are paying money to see the show, they have every right to say we don't like the show. What it does to me is that it makes me go and get better on my next outing. Unfortunately, creatives have ego. Nothing wrong with it. That's creatives are who they are because of their ego. Unfortunately, they don't know when to turn it on and off. And if you don't turn it off, you can't become a better creative. If people can't tell you, because it's the thing about filmmaking, and I learned this when I'm writing, you're so into your head that you don't even see the loopholes in your own story because of how you've made it, because of how it has gone. You're like, no, it's awesome. And that awesomeness is blocking you from seeing the loophole. Because the way I've said the story in my mind, no, I have to tell it like this. Unfortunately, an outside person looks at it and says, nah, no, it's not as great as this should be. I'll tell you a story. This is why I love working with structured organizations like networks and whatnot. The first draft we did for DJ, I remember when we were in the story workshop, and it was I was shouting at the story workshop. I'm like, hey, this story the people will die, they will kill them. Shouted, and we delivered 6 scripts. And then, you get this meeting a couple of months later, and these South Africans are telling you your story sucks. And they're giving you pointers. It's not, they're pointing, they're telling you this is why this story is not great. Number one, this. Then you two, you're not like, damn, why didn't I think about that? Damn. And then they trash your entire 6 episodes, and then you have to go and rewrite it. We did 6 drafts of that show. 6 drafts. 6 before it became what it became. And I promise you that if we had done the first draft, that show wouldn't have been what it was supposed to be. So sometimes you have to open up your mind to criticism, because what it does is that it makes you better. People see things that you didn't see when you were creating, but your ego just stops you from seeing it. So I love criticism. And I feel like, you know, the entire industry should be open-minded to criticism. Don't get me wrong. There are people who have bad belly. No matter the good that you do, somebody will still tell you your film didn't make sense because they didn't understand where you were coming from. And again, that's okay. Everybody has their own perspectives, and that's fine. You made your film. Somebody appreciated it. Somebody else didn't appreciate it. You take the good ones you like. You take the ones you don't care about. You put it into your next offering and make a good film.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That's a great answer. Well, I have two more questions, not mine this time. One of them comes from Olukoya Benjamin, who says it's quite appreciating for the fact that Africa Magic slash multi-choice gives opportunity to new talents, as in the faces that grace the screens. How about the back end guys, the crew, the technical guys? How do you and they give the upcoming technical guys the chance to show what they can do?
So, I mean, the technical guys are really the company's problem. It's not Africa Magic's issue. And personally, for Feemo, what we thrive on is capacity building, skill acquisition, and then running them through the things that we do. Half the guys who are working for us are people who we trained. They were PAs before to this to become who they were. People who oh, I was maybe a sound assistant and they become HODs. And so we're very big on building capacity and whatnot. In fact, some of the people I've had people who worked with me for 8 years. I've had people who've worked with me since I started making film. I've had people who just joined who are probably going to work with me for the longest time. And the more projects that we do, I'm also very big on getting people on board and training them, in doing some of the things that we do. In fact, there's a guy who's on our VFX team. He has a nickname called Roto. Yeah, he used to be a sound assistant before, but he had this passion. When we were doing one of our shows, he used to talk to me about how he had this passion about doing VFX. So we spoke to our head of VFX, and then on the last show, he's moved departments. So he was interning, and I think we were paying him, and then he started practicing rotoscoping. And now every time there's a rotoscope job to do, we pass it on to him. So we're very big on those kinds of things. It's a must for us.
Great, thank you. Now, one really last question. This one is from Khalif Abimbola. Hello, sirs. It's been a remarkable session so far, and the minutes are worth it. Thank you. Mr. James, in storytelling and or filmmaking, do you consider communal slash tribal stories to overweight individuals or character themed stories? Because I perceive that you are more invested in the former. I mean, would you rather write and develop stories in Lagos than write and develop stories on James or Sona who might have grown up in Lagos? Secondly, I'm writing this after Toby. I am a model represented by Beth Model Africa, and I'm also seeking to break into the TV/film industry to leverage on my creative professions. I have values in research, storytelling, and acting, and I'd appreciate whatever offers you can grant to me based on my listed values. Thank you. I think Abimbola is pitching here. So, okay, I hope you understood the question, James.
Yes, I do.
It's
Um,
okay.
I do. Abimbola, you can. I mean, again, there is an internship program. You can, if you want to come through, and even if you don't make the internship program, if you want to come and visit us and whatnot, send a message on Instagram. I'll hook you up with one of our producers. You can just come and show face for 2 days, learn one or two things, and leave. To answer your question, I think that you need to realize that stories are really individual based. Again, it really depends on the kinds of stories you're telling. You're telling a story about somebody's journey. That's what stories are about. Who are we looking at in this story? What is this person? Why are we looking at the person? Why are we watching the person? So we're telling James's story. Who's James? So what is James's motivation in film? What is his motivation in this television show? Right? And that is the journey that we're following. But the thing about James is that James is Nigerian and he lives in Lagos. And so therefore, because he's Nigerian and he lives in Lagos, his entire being is covered by the nuances of being a Nigerian and the nuances of being in Lagos. And whatever journey he's facing is also ruled by the fact that he lives in Lagos. And so his journey is going to be covered by the nuances of being in Lagos and being in Nigeria. And so it's not one over the other, they go hand in hand. But the most important thing is that you're following a character and their journey. And that's what you need. So I can't tell a story about Lagos. Lagos is not a human being. Lagos, I mean, I can, but Lagos, what is the Lagos journey that I'm telling? Who is driving that story? And so you first start with the character. And then, so if you look at all the shows, like Ajoche, whatever, Ajoche is the story of the king who found a boy. He loved the boy as his son because, his wife was killed and she was pregnant. And he decided to take this boy up as his um his adoptive son, and he was going to name him the heir to the throne. Apparently, the boy was actually the true heir to the throne, but his brother had his own plans. Now, if you notice, these are all individual stories that the themes surround betrayal, um, you know, loss, scheming, all that stuff, which are, I mean, that cuts across every human being on the face of the earth, whether you're Chinese, Japanese, or whether you're an alien. Like those are fundamental, core values as a human being. However, the backdrop of that story is Idoma, Benue State. And so when you talk about the king, how does the king behave, or what is ruled by his behavior? He's a king. He's an Idoma king. There's the way he speaks. There's certain things he does. His tribe takes, influences some of his decisions, and that's how this individual is housed by their culture and their tribe, right? So it's the stories are layered. You're telling an individual story that's layered by culture, tradition, and nuances. Do you understand? So it's one big ball of many things. That's what makes up, the stories. You can't separate them individually, because if you separate them, then James in his journey has no identity. Who is he? Why? What's influencing him to do the things that he's doing? Do you get? So it makes more sense to say, for example, in the example that I gave when I was talking about somebody who was trying to tell queer stories, which is, so I'm a homosexual or whatever, and I'm trying to come out. The story is, oh yeah, he's trying to come out, he's trying to tell his parents that he's homosexual, but where is he telling the story? So if I tell the story that this person is living in New York or this person is living in California, the impact of that story is different from this person is living in Abeokuta. Because the reaction of the people around him will be very different. In America, they'll be like, God, you're coming out. Oh my God, we're going to have a party. Yay. Nigeria, they take you to church. They will say, oh, there's 14 years. Do you get? So it depends on the backdrop, and which is why it is very important. So you can't tell an individual story without rooting him somewhere. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does, because Khalif Abimbala has said, well understood already. Well, we've come to the end of this time. Our time is out now. Thank you so much, James. This has truly been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you for sharing so much with us. And thank you also to our participants. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your presence, for giving us this time. And well, we look forward to hosting you all again when we have our subsequent edition, which comes up in a couple of weeks or so. So, James, thank you so much. Thank you. We really
Okay.
appreciate this time that you have given to us. So, let me wish you all a very happy rest of Saturday. Very little that's left of the weekend. To have a pleasant day. All the best. Thank you.